Okay.
Good.
I'm very optimistic here, and we're rolling.
We in focus?
We're in
Both
focus.
cameras?
Yeah.
3 cameras, please. Okay, so,
Well, this is terrific.
yeah. So, Fritz, you seem to have a fixation, you can't get away from rivers.
No.
You talk about that, you're on 2 rivers.
Well, all the rivers. I love the beauty of our great rivers. I love working on trying to protect some of them, St. Croix spectacularly, but now the greater downtown Mississippi River project, wonderful, wonderful thing. You'll see that when I go out and sit and watch the world go by, I'm right there on the Mississippi, so I can, every day something's happening. If the weather's good, people come out of their homes like ants come out of their anthills and head for that bridge and head for that river. People want to see and be a part of this wonderful river system. And we're very, very lucky that these things are being done, and it's right here in front of us.
When do you recall getting involved in environmental issues, especially water-related issues?
It would be when I went to the Senate, but before. I was involved in like the Sherburne Wildlife Refuge and other issues at the state level when I was Attorney General. But when I went to the Senate, I quickly became friends with Gaylord Nelson, the saint from across the river, who probably more than anyone else in his time articulated the reasons for protecting the environment. And he said, how would you like to join with me in protecting St. Croix? And I said, I'd love to do it. And I remember getting, that would be about 65, something like that.
Who else cared back then besides yourself and Gaylord Nelson, do you recall?
Oh, there were a lot of people. You know, there was what I call the high tide, when there were very strong progressive majorities in the Congress, maybe like when last time was when Teddy Roosevelt was around. And we were passing civil rights legislation, we were passing education legislation, and there was a strong belief and thrust on behalf of environmental legislation. So we got the Rivers program, we got many new national parks, some of them in our own state. We made a quantum leap forward in protecting our environment, and I was lucky to be around there then.
It seems to have made a difference, because I remember when I was a young man, or a young boy, actually, living close to the Mississippi River up in Anoka County. My parents told me to stay away from it. It was filthy. It was dangerous because of the currents, but it was just filthy.
Right.
And now I saw the confluence of the Minnesota River and the Mississippi River.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that the Mississippi was the bad actor.
That's what they always say, look at it there, yeah.
And so there's such a difference between the Mississippi. So some of the things that you did must have made some kind of difference.
Yes, and I think putting the national river through Minneapolis, the first river of its kind in the country dealing with downtown areas, began a process here that has helped clean up the water, and in so many other ways made the river more livable and raises the prospect for even more good work. And when we get into a situation like the invasive species that worried everybody, and it should worry us, it was because we had the park and we could work together that they closed the docks, lock and dam down here, giving us a better chance to protect the river.
So when you think of the vast array of parks the National Park Service manages, it includes things like Glacier and Yellowstone, but it also includes the White House, the battlefields. And yet, even in the context of all these different types of parks, don't you think that this Minra Park is kind of unusual, an urban park?
Oh, it is. You know, the history of the Park Service has been to find areas that have been that are protected, unmolested, and in fact put the federal protection around it. that all the great parks, big parks, had that in common. When we put Voyageurs National Park, one of the reasons we could argue was, well, it's pure, it's untroubled, let's save it now. What's different with this, what is the title of this bill?
Mississippi National River.
The Mississippi National River is it goes right through the downtown of the 14th largest metropolitan area in the country, with lots of problems, lots of developmental issues, up and down the river. And this, it was a step into the dark. We didn't know if it'd work or not. It was different in principle than most parks, than all parks practically, and it was different than all the other rivers in the national river system. But it has been new, it has worked, we've made a lot of progress, a lot more needs to be done, but it's an example of how we can bring the park services into helping us improve and save areas, not just in the wilderness, but also in the areas where most people now live. That's a very hopeful step.
Do you remember, again, this is an unusual idea what we did. Do you remember the first time you heard about it or when people started talking about doing that?
Well, that'd been around for some time, maybe 15, 20 years before Durenberger and got the bill passed.
Why don't you take that from the top so we have the Durenberger and Vento together?
When Durenberger and Vento put it together and passed it in the Congress, not in the best of the times, but they got it passed anyway. But the idea had been around for some time. I heard about it when I was in the Senate, but that's been true. Most of these proposals, there's always a gestation period. People have to think about it, check around. You got to get the scientists and the others out there to see if it makes sense. You got to build the case with the Park Service, and then if you're lucky, it'll pass.
Just about we've all been around here long enough to remember a time when there was actually bipartisan support for the environment and for parks. Can you imagine something like this great park happening in this at this point in time?
You bring up the saddest point that I can think of, that America seems to be paralyzed across the board, that we enjoy yelling at each other more than we do getting things done, that we can't get sense on the budget, we can't get a sense on what we can spend or not spend. We can't work out any of these issues in the park that the Park Service and others deal with. And we're paralyzed, and it's really sad. And now the phone calls are coming in left and right. Should I take
You're a popular guy here.
Yeah, I know, it's my granddaughter.
Go ahead. I'll turn the camera.
Humphrey used to tell me, he said, if it's a big issue, you never get there without the help of the minority. You got to have both sides. And we always tried to do that, and it worked most of the time. Now these last years, that thing has just collapsed. And thank God the rivers just keep flowing anyway, or it would be in trouble.
Okay, let's see. You were obviously a vital player in the administration of Jimmy Carter. Actually, I'd like to ask you a question about him after we're done with these, but what role do you recall that your administration with Jimmy Carter had in protecting the environment, especially rivers and water?
Carter was a very strong environmentalist, felt it deeply within himself. When he became president, he wanted to do things. Remember the dams dispute and so on, tried to change things there. He always supported the National Rivers Program, always supported the inclusion of additional rivers. He let me do what I wanted to do in the name of his administration on all these issues. And those are good times for the environment. We had good secretaries, good administrators. I think the environmentalists will tell you those are good years.
Fritz, you might comment on the protection of Alaska national lands.
Oh, yeah,
Parks
one
might
of-
be
one-
one of the signature accomplishments.
Yeah, one of the things that is so striking about the Carter administration was the Alaskan national lands set aside. In it, President Carter set aside half the state of Alaska. And that's now protected. Some of it's now in Park Service. A lot of complaints at first, but now you go up there and they're all bragging about it. And talk about courage. I think that, I said it earlier, but I think that's right, that in that one decision, Carter set aside more land for parks than any other action in the history of the United States.
I think he doubled the size of the
Dou-
Park Service
dou-
with
dou-
one stroke of the pen.
Doubled the size of the Park Service. It's a great, great story, and I wish we had more examples.
One thing that surprises me when you think about the role that the Mississippi River has played in our history, our economy and all that, it's interesting that it took until 1985 for someone to figure out we ought to create a national park devoted strictly to the Mississippi River.
Yes. I'm an old timer. I remember when rivers were considered places to dump things in. Business would locate next to them and dump their affluent there. All kinds of junk and stuff went in the rivers, and they became filthy. And the ones out in the wilderness didn't, but rivers like the Mississippi became very dirty rivers. And it was almost a reflection of the ethics of the environmental interests at that time. And it was only in the 60s we started to say, we got to stop this. These rivers are important to our future. These rivers can still be saved. It's going to be tough, but we need to save it. And all across the country, particularly the National River System, other ways, big changes for the better, but a lot more is needed.
John, you might ask Fritz to talk about the fact that, we're almost to the 50th anniversary of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, which is, he's the lead co-sponsor of with Gaylord, and that to me is sort of a platform. If it hadn't been for the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, it would have been very difficult, even 20 years later, to come back
Right.
and put a river like this.
No,
as you
I'm
look
not-
at Chattahoochee and
I don't
Cuyahoga.
think we'd be here celebrating it.
Let me pose the question so
Yeah.
we can get that answer.
Yeah.
So do you think that the creation of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act in any way aided and abetted the creation of MNRA?
Yes, I'm sure of it. I think that the example of these rivers around the country that we had saved and what it had meant to those communities and to the country to do so, the spectacular results of our own St. Croix River that we all know. This got people thinking about, well, what about the Mississippi, the greatest of all rivers? What about downtown Minneapolis? Could we possibly take this principle of protection that we've used in these less developed areas and protect a river in a downtown area? The answer was yes. I don't think it would happen without the earlier experience. This is also asking an awful lot of the Park Service. These gifted career officers, and they are gifted. They are career officers, thank God. They're used to the more rural, pristine areas, and this was a big challenge to them to catch up and be a part of it. And I've been impressed. I've known every park superintendent here since then, and they're all on top of it. And Paul Libovitz, let me ring his bell. He's up at Indiana Dunes now, but he was great, and he was always around here. And now we have John Anfinson, who's great too. So we really benefited from a creative, engaged, career Park Service staff.
We're all familiar with the miracle of fishes and loaves, and that seems to be Congress's plan for funding the National Park Service.
Well, I like to fish, And I say, when I go, that I'm going on a religious journey, and I said, it's part of the parable of the fishes, not the fishes in the bowl, just the fishes. We're working on the fishes first. Doing a good job, too.
So do you have any concerns about the lack of funding for the National Park Service, especially coming up with the 100th anniversary?
I have a lot of concern about it. The Park Service has patched over, compromised, looked the other way, encouraged optimism when in their hearts they know it's tougher. And so as we celebrate this anniversary, let's find ways to arm the Park Service more fully so they don't have to go through all these fights all the time.
Looking back now, almost 25 years since the creation of the Mississippi National River Recreation Area, how do you think things have worked out from the way it was conceived?
I think it's great. When it was conceived, we hoped we could make the river cleaner. We could improve the riparian situation so that more people could come down and enjoy the river. That we could bat back bad proposals. And I would say that it's been a big success. We got a long way to go. We talked about the invasive species here a few minutes ago. I think if it hadn't been for the Park Service, we'd had a tougher time getting a remedy in place.
What do you see as the big threat or threats to water quality in rivers these days?
Going back to the old ethics where rivers are places that you dump things in. They're not, as we've tried to prove, great sources of beauty and comfort and the majesty of God's nature. Instead of that, a dumping ground. That's what we once did with them. The biggest danger is we'll go back to that. I don't think we will, but it's a danger.
Do you have any comments about the importance of citizen-based advocacy organizations like the Friends of the Mississippi in terms of helping to protect a resource?
They're indispensable. I don't think we'd have passed most of these things without them. I don't think we'd kept the attention on these issues without them. I think that career Park Service officials can only do so much. It's got to be the public that's in there wanting it to work, that lives and experiences these things and has the enthusiasm that comes from that. Yeah, we need a lot. We need it. We need a lot more of it.
So, do you have a favorite spot on the Mississippi?
Yes, I can show you what it is if you want to look at it. It's right out here. Yeah, this is the heart of the busiest part of the city. It's partly because of the National River Bill. It's you can see it's well tended to. There's history everywhere here. You look at the falls here. It's the only falls in the Mississippi. You look at people. I think we're working out a good arrangement where thousands of people can enjoy the river without hurting it, and it's a joy to watch.
I'd kind of like to end this with two things, but the first one would be this documentary is going to have a call to arms so that people don't sleep.
Yeah.
And so, do you have any?
Well, you asked earlier what I worry about. I worry about people going back to sleep and not paying attention to these great natural resources. I don't think that'll happen, but I think we got to keep worrying about it. People got to be engaged. They got to go to the meetings. We have to hear from them. They have to make a difference. They have, and I hope they keep it up.
So, would you mind just saying a few things about President Carter, like his condition right now, and your hopes for his speedy recovery?
Like I think most Americans, I watch his news conference when, in a historic way, magnificent way, he announced his tough circumstances, battling cancer, but also told us a lot again in graceful ways, gracious ways, about the depth of his faith, his belief in democracy, in making things work. And I've heard from so many people, that was one of the important moments, I think, in modern history, to have somebody talk that way with such a, as I said, gracious and courageous and positive attitude despite the grimness of his situation. You know, Carter's a great man. It didn't surprise me at all. That's the real Carter there. And I'm going to go down and see him in a few days. And I said, I'd like to come down. I said, let's just talk about the good old days. So that's what we're going to do. I'll fill him up with some of the old stories, see what happens.
That was a great press conference. Then he went around and taught Sunday school again on
Yes.
Sunday.
And he had to
Which he's done for only, what, 40 years or something?
Yeah, such a big crowd there that he had to teach 2 classes. And he did it, yeah.
Well, I don't have any more questions. You guys, are you just,
That's
this is
great.
just
Wendy,
fabulous?
anything else?
John, I wonder on the answer about advocacy organizations, you asked the question, but do you think you have enough?
Oh, yeah, I suppose it'd be nice if you could say something nice specifically about the Friends of the Mississippi, not that we're trying to ask leading questions.
Well, no, I can do that. You know, for example, the Friends of Mississippi organization's made a big difference around here. I hear from them all the time at the meetings. They're there making their point. They know what they're talking about, and not only that, because they live this river, they really sense the depth and the understanding. So, yeah, we need more of that.
Great.
Fritz, you have spoken over the years out on the St. Croix, and you've used the phrase death by 1,000 cuts or something like that.
Nixon cuts.
Nixon cuts, and I know what you mean on the St. Croix because of its pristine nature, but I think the same applies here. You just said a couple minutes ago you hope people don't go to sleep on water quality, but I think you also worry about little decisions sort of building up, and you might want to just talk about that in the context of the
That's
St.
one
Croix.
of the things you learn when you work on these issues. Somebody's always coming along and saying, well, I'm just going to build a power line here. That's all I'm going to do. Have to knock down some trees and go across the river, but that's all I'm going to do. And then someone comes along and says, well, you know, all I want is a highway here that will allow us to get across the river faster. And before you know it, the river is changing because we allow these nicks and the cuts that add up to really changing the nature of the river itself. I know people are for the bridge. I was against it. The National Rivers legislation said you can't change the flow of the river. That's basic. Well, they did change the flow. And I think they changed the nature of the river. We've got to start fighting each of these nicks as though it was an assault upon the river, a major fight, and they can't be just considered little nicks, because they're not. They change the whole nature of the river. And that's a big question along the Mississippi, because right here, you're in the middle of town, and you know, what do you allow? What is acceptable if you want this river to be the kind of prestigious, clean river that we all believe in?
Yeah, we're good.
That's great, thank you, Fritz. Can they take some shots of you out on the balcony?
Yeah, we should
looking
get,
at the river and yelling at people?
one part of this interview should be Mondale getting briefed. Do you guys call him names so they get an idea of what they're up against?
Dave, Tom Hagedorn, Arlen Erdahl.
They were all for it.
Bruce, Marty, you know, I think almost the entire delegation was on.
It was a pioneering,
Well,
New
as an urban river,
right,
you know, a partnership park, if you will,
yeah.
it was a very unique addition, and as we talked a few minutes ago, it is still the only section of the 2,500 mile Mississippi designated as a national river and ministered by the Park Service. And I think your point of right in the middle of a major, the 14th largest metropolitan area, you've got this 72-mile park. And, you know, it was passed in '88. I think the general management plan was signed by Bruce Babbitt on the Paddleford in '94, maybe,
Yeah.
'93, '94. So we've had about 20 years of experience, and, you know, there's been a lot of battles, but the river's cleaner. We've stopped some unwarranted development. All of a sudden, in the middle of it, we figure out these invasive carp are coming our way, which was not an issue, certainly not an issue when you know, introduced the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and certainly not an issue when the Mineral Bill was passed, but is a big issue now, and one reason why this lock is closed, which, you know, was a very significant initiative, you know, led by Whitney and others, so it's fascinating. And we're also going to talk to John Anfinson, the new
Yes.
superintendent.
I'm-
You got to know Paul Labovitz, his
Yeah.
predecessor, who's now
Paul was really
saving
good.
the Indiana dunes. Paul made a big difference.
Yeah,
I credit Paul and this guy
yeah,
for
right.
most of the improvement in this river in the last 20 years.
He's saving the dunes now, huh?
Yeah, he's got his hands full. He's got a real big part. But John, launch your way
All right,
before we.
Okay.
Good stuff.
I'm ready to go.
Can somebody give me a bottle of water or something?
Yeah.
One right there.
Yep, there's one.